All right, here we go. Microphone working, cameras working. We are live. What's going on, everybody? There you go. All right, we continue on our journey exploring literature and this historical novel by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So this is the second episode we've done on Dostoevsky's Demons. Nice cover there. The first part ended up being about 3 hours, and I probably got to about 5% of what I wanted to talk about in that first episode. So here we are again. And this book, I'm not going to be able to do it justice. This is not going to be strictly an analysis of this book. We are going to be jumping around in history. We're talking about a novel here it's biographical, autobiographical, as far as Fyodor Dostoevsky's life goes. But it's also biographical in the way that it portrays the progression of ideas into action in the lives of revolutionaries and in a culture, in a small provincial town in Russia. This book is set, right? It was published in 1872. And it's really underrated. I mean, this is an underread novel. This is I think it's one of the best novels I've ever read. I will say that. Very prophetic, right? And what this novel actually does, and what we're going to discuss today, is how Dostoevsky here exposes the real spirit of the revolution, the methodologies of the revolutionaries, and provides an archetypal profile of the professional revolutionaries. Not only that, but he also shows the undercurrent of revolutionary movements that swept through Europe and the root of that undercurrent, and one of the starting points of that undercurrent being Illuminism. So we are actually going to be discussing what Dostoevsky shows in his novel to be the true nature of the Illuminist ideals, the true nature of the revolutionary ideals of the Enlightenment, as exposited by Adam Weishaupt in his Bavarian group of Illuminists, the so-called Illuminati. Right now, this group is mythological in character as far as modern historians go. Right, modern historians have a hard time broaching this subject because of all the kooks and quacks involved in so-called research, which really is basically just regurgitation of rumors very often. Real scholarship is marred for other reasons as well, including people in academics, professors being concerned that their careers may be at risk by discussing some of these ideas due to the kooky nature of a lot of the stuff out there. But we're going to explore the actual real so-called Illuminati, self-proclaimed illuminated enlightened ones out of the Enlightenment. And Dostoevsky in his book Demons shows how these Enlightenment ideals, how the model employed by Weishaupt and his group spread across not just all of Europe, but also into Russia. And so the book here, it actually predicted the firestorm that became the Bolshevik Revolution. Dostoevsky predicted everything that was to come. And under the regime of Lenin, Stalin, he predicted Stalinism. The novel actually shows the exact methodologies that would later be used in the Bolshevik Revolution. Right? Chaos agents being employed to start fires, right? Controlled larceny, useful larceny, the use of useful idiots, the generation of liberals, Masonic liberals, enraptured with Enlightenment ideals and ideas of progress and equality, and liberty. These slogans that really are just empty slogans. we talked about in the last episode, these slogans, liberty, fraternity, equality, they're empty slogans, but also just in the language there and in the concepts of liberty and equality, for instance, you've got this kind of dialectical opposition. Liberty and equality are diametrically opposed. So he very effectively in this novel shows how the kind of liberal, libertarian, classical liberal worldview gives birth to the nihilist revolutionaries, and how those nihilist revolutionaries set fire to the entire world. Yeah, and the fire, the symbol of fire, we're going to be getting into that. We're also going to be drawing a little bit from James H. Billington's book, Fire in the Minds of Men, as well as some historical work from Nesta Webster, her book, World Revolution. Nesta Webster's book, World Revolution, as well as her book, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements. So Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, I think this was 1924, first published in 1924. World Revolution was, I think, 1927. Let me just make sure here. 1921 was the first edition of World Revolution by Nesta Webster. And Nesta Webster, again, she's not a kook. She's not some weirdo, random kook. Winston Churchill actually quite enjoyed her work. Winston Churchill said that Mrs. Webster has so ably shown a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution, and it has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century. And now this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. So Winston Churchill praised this book, World Revolution, and was also, later on become one of the major political figures of the 20th century. So let's get into it. We're going to start out, with a quote from Dostoevsky's book here. So Fyodor Dostoevsky, remember, he was a revolutionary. He started out as a revolutionary. He got involved in these movements. We'll talk about that in a second, but we'll start out with this quote here, which we're going to discuss the illumination of the Enlightenment, the illumination of people's minds. The line from this book that James H. Billington's historical piece, Fire in the Minds of Men, is referring to comes from this same chapter here. It's the chapter after this fete, this fair, right? This basically liberal carnival thrown by the governess. It is one of the biggest parties that this province has seen in the small province in Russia. This liberal governess is being influenced and has become basically under the spell of a young revolutionary named Pyotr Stepanovich, right? So Pyotr Stepanovich is the son of a liberal author, a aspiring poet, who's kind of like the, he's kind of like a Jordan Peterson type character, I would say. The father of Stepan Trofimovich. He's very much like Jordan Peterson, right? He'd go on these long-winded rants and basically say nothing. Oh, yes, but no, and yes, maybe, and no. Stepan Trofimovich, he's a liberal professor, right? And he lost his job as a professor, but he has this mythological history that he makes up about himself, that he was just too revolutionary. His ideas were too cutting edge, and he was too progressive for the universities. But he really actually didn't even get. He was never actually exiled. He likes to believe that he was exiled, that he was a persecuted man, but his ideas were really nothing special at the time. Yeah, so that the father of this young revolutionary is this liberal who believes in all the ideas of progress, who believes in the ideas put forth in Chernyshevsky's book, What Is to Be Done. This is a famous book. I think it was published in the 1840s or 50s. Chernyshevsky's book ended up influencing Lenin, who coincidentally was born the year that Dostoevsky was writing this novel and finished this novel. That's 1871. So in 1871, Lenin is born. Lenin later would publish a work that he titled also What Must Be Done, which is referring to Chernyshevsky's book, What Is to Be Done. And this is a novel that puts forth a lot of the ideas of the Enlightenment, right? It was very anti-clerical, anti-religion, and pro-progress, right? And by progress, what we mean is, pee-pee in the poo-poo progress, right? Literally, it's the main character of that book gets involved in some strange romantic encounters, becomes kind of like polyamorous, has, non-traditional sexual proclivities, we'll say. Yeah, it's a utopian book about the dissolution of family, the dissolving of borders, and the creation of basically like this world utopia. So the father of the young revolutionary character, we're going to discuss how he essentially embodies the ideals, the activities, the worldview, and the historical utility of the secret societies, especially Weishaupt's group. Now, the word Illuminati, right? The Illuminatus group, the Illuminists. Illuminism was essentially just Enlightenment philosophy put into practical use in the framework of secret societies based on concentric circles of membership, right? Tiered levels, a hierarchical order that sells everybody on the ideas of liberty and equality and fraternity. So they're selling people on the ideas of absolute freedom, of getting rid of hierarchy, right? Of getting rid of all of the traditional structures of society in general, but it's also structured in a hierarchical manner, right? So just there, you've got this kind of schizophrenic worldview, and the entire worldview of the revolutionaries reflects that, right? Their actions reflect that. These are very often very self-destructive people, which we see in the novel here by Dostoevsky. Right, so this fete that gets put on Pyotr Stepanovich kind of creates chaos, right? This fete, the fair, that builds up for the whole first couple parts of the novel, the first two parts of the novel, first 2/3 of the novel, leads up to this great party. Everybody in the province is going to come. People pawn their animals off. People are so excited for this to show their beautiful outfits, right? This giant party where everybody will show how progressive they are, how they're all down for the new ideas, how they're all into the progressive and even possibly revolutionary ideas. But during this party, which ends up being a huge mess, right? During this party, it comes to be known and becomes obvious that there are some strange forces working behind the scenes. There are some strange forces working behind the scenes of influencing people's behavior. Strange people get brought in from the outside that are causing chaotic action. And then at the peak of this party, after all this crazy stuff goes down, there's a fire. Right? There's a massive arson. The fire starts in 3 different places simultaneously, and the whole town erupts in flames. A large portion of this town erupts in flames. So here's a passage that's really relevant to what we're going to get into as far as the actual historical Illuminati, not this, Jay-Z, Beyonce, right? Everything with the triangles, Illuminati, confirm. None of this weird conspiracy candy stuff. We're getting into actual history, and we're going to discuss the revolutionary figures of Buonarotti, who's very little known, as well as Lenin, and somebody who inspired both of these men and inspired many of the characters that Dostoevsky has portrayed here. and that is Adam Weishaupt. So quoting from Dostoevsky's book, part of the male population was working hard, ruthlessly chopping down fences, and even knocking apart entire shanties that stood closer to the fire and to windward. There was only the crying of awakened children and the wailing lamentations of women who had already successfully dragged their junk out. The unsuccessful were silently and energetically dragging theirs out. Sparks and grit flew far away. They were extinguished as well as possible. At the fire itself, there was a crowd of spectators who had come running from every end of the town. Some helped to put it out, others gazed like admirers. A big fire at night always produces a stirring and exhilarating impression. Fireworks are based on that. But there the fire is disposed along graceful, regular lines, and with all its safety, produces a playful and light impression, as after a glass of champagne. A real fire is another matter, mere horror, and after all, some sense of personal danger, as it were, combined with the well-known exhilarating impression of a fire at night, produce in the spectator, no, not of course in the burnt-out inhabitant, a sort of brain concussion, and a challenge, as it were, to his own destructive instincts, which, alas, lie hidden in every soul, even that of the most humble and familial titular counselor. This gloomy sensation is almost always intoxicating. I really do not know whether it is possible to watch a fire without a certain pleasure. This was said to me word for word by Stepan Trofimovich. On returning from a night fire he had chanced to witness, and still under the impression of the spectacle. Of course, the same admirer of night fires will also rush into the fire and save a burning child or an old woman, but that's an altogether different matter. So fire. All right, this is the at the peak of this novel. We have a huge fire. We got a massive fire, as well as some murders. Right, so there's a big body count in this book, big body count in this novel, and the peak of this novel, the climax of the novel is this fire. So this fire is going down. A couple paragraphs later, Lemke, pale, his eyes flashing. Lemke was is the governor, right? So the governor's wife, the governess, set this fet up. The governor at this point, he's just gone completely insane. Right? His wife is being influenced by this young revolutionary nihilist who tells everybody that he's involved in a secret society that is essential, and that their little cell within the secret society is just a single knot, right, and a rope that extends all the way throughout all of Europe. Now, nobody really knows whether this is true. It's not actually clear whether it's true or not. What Pyotr wants them to believe, that they are all cells within this greater organism of a revolutionary movement, right? Because things are compartmentalized, right? Which is very historically accurate. I'm going to tell you in a minute how Dostoevsky actually knew about Weishaupt and his group. He actually understood the methodologies, the ideology, and the history of the Illuminists, because he was involved in a sect of revolutionaries that may or may not have been very involved in some Illuminist type activities, right? Some revolutionary activities. So Lemke, pale, his eyes flashing, was uttering the most astonishing things. To top it off, he was without his hat and had lost it long ago. It's all arson, it's nihilism. If anything's ablaze, it's nihilism. I heard all but with horror. And though there was no longer anything to be astonished at, still manifest reality always has something shocking about it. Your Excellency, a policeman turned up beside him. If you be so good as to try domestic repose, sir. The way it is, it's even dangerous for your Excellency to be standing here. This policeman, as I learned later, was purposely left with Andrei Antonovich as the police chief to watch over him and try as hard as he could to take him home in case of danger, even to act with force, a charge obviously beyond the powers of its executor. The tears of the burnt-out people will be wiped away, but the town will be burned. It's all 4 blackguards, 4.5. Arrest the blackguard. He's in it alone. And has slandered the 4.5. He worms himself into the honor of families. Governesses have been used to set houses on fire. This is mean, mean. Aye, what is he doing? He cried, suddenly noticing a fireman on the roof of the blazing cottage, the roof already burned down through under him, and fire flaring up all around. Pull him down, he'll fall through. He'll catch fire. Put him out. What are you doing up there? Putting it out, Your Excellency. Unbelievable. The fire is in people's minds, not on the rooftops. Pull him down and drop it all. Better drop it. Leave it to itself somehow. Aye, who is that still crying? An old woman. That's that line right there. The fire is in people's minds. The fire is in people's minds, not on the rooftops. The fire is in people's minds, not on the rooftops. So the book, Fire in the Minds of Men. Book Fire in the Minds of Men by James H. Billington, Fire in the Minds of Men, Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. We're going to be pulling heavily from this. We can learn a little bit about the true Illuminists, right? The real sect of the Illuminati, which was a group infiltrated other secret societies in 18th century Europe, started in Bavaria by a professor at a Jesuit school, a professor of canon law called Adam Weishaupt. Now that line that he's referencing there, the fire is in men's minds. Remember that one. So we're discussing a little bit of the ideas, the ideology of the revolutionaries today. We will also, we're going to have to jump over to, let's see, where do we even start? Pyotr Stepanovich, right? Pyotr Stepanovich, again, the son of a liberal, a young Russian character in Dostoevsky's novel, who goes throughout Europe, travels extensively throughout Europe. He never really has an actual job. He's kind of the son of like a middle-class moocher, right? His dad's a mooch. His dad is a retired boomer professor. He's a really goofy guy. He's a character that ends up actually being redeemed in the end of the novel. But it's really poignant where Pyotr comes from, right? His dad's a mooch, and an absentee father who was divorced once. Oh no, I think he had a wife who had died, and then he was divorced another time. Lived with another woman as kind of like her pet academic, right? He lived with this wealthy woman and essentially mooched off of her. And once he became useless to her, she basically tried to get rid of him. Yeah, he had this kind of failed love story with this other woman. They've really, at one point, probably should have married each other. They were in love with each other. But this love got rejected, right? And the father of Pyotr and in his life. The rejected love, the screwed up families, the weird relationships, this is a pattern that you see in all the revolutionaries, right? You see this in the life of Lenin. You see this in the life of Buonarotti, we're going to speak about a little bit later. You also see this in the life of Weishaupt, right? Weishaupt's father died when he was 4 or 5 years old. He was raised by his godfather, who was enraptured with the ideas of the Enlightenment, enraptured with the ideas of progress, of the science, right? The science is going to fix everything. And this was is basically his father figure. Yeah, so Pyotr Stepanovich is a nihilist. All right, his dad was like the idealistic reformer, but not full-on nihilist. Right, his dad was kind of an aesthetic. He still believed in aesthetics. He still believed in beauty, the importance of beauty, but he didn't have anything to really ground that beauty in. And later on in his redemption, you do see this reconciliation and of Stepan Trofimovich with God. And he essentially repents of everything. He says, I've been a liar my whole life. He says, even when I was telling the truth, I was a liar. Later in the book, but he gives birth to this son who is just a completely disrespectful nihilist. He has no respect for his father. He has no respect for any of the structures of the culture around him. And why should he? He's been told by his father that the culture is meaningless, that it's unscientific. And his father didn't even raise him, right? But so he wasn't told by his father, but his father, the example that he was given was of a freeloading, free spirit, free love guy. What are you going to do? What kind of child are you going to raise as a freeloading, free spirit, free love 1840s essentially baby boomer. You're gonna raise a monster, and this is what happens with Stepan's son Pyotr. And so he travels throughout Europe, including Switzerland, interfaces with various characters. And when he comes back into town, he brings with him a strange influence, a demonic influence, really. I mean, this is why the book is titled Demons. So, the influence that Pyotr brings is the revolutionary influence. It is it's like German idealism. It's utilitarianism. It's nihilism. It's atheism. It's positivism. And it's those brought to their logical conclusion, which is just the will to power. And this is a pre-Nietzsche. Right? This book is written before Nietzsche had published his major works. But he is kind of he is the dark side of Nietzsche's positive nihilism. Right? Trying to manifest his will to power through revolutionary activity and destruction. Right? But he's also hasn't transcended the spite that Nietzsche thought was weakened man, right? Nietzsche was really critical of the resentment, right? Resentment, this jealous, idealistic hatred of life and of the world that he saw coming from slave morality, right? Now, I'm not saying Nietzsche was right about a lot of things, but ultimately Nietzsche's nihilism is completely destructive as well, and it destroyed Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was completely wrecked by his worldview. I mean, he died miserable and insane, sadly. So Pyotr Stepanovich comes back into this town, and he's organizing all these little circles, organizing these little conspiratorial circles. And the model for this comes straight from Weishaupt. So this kind of middle-class son of a professor, just like Weishaupt, absentee father, just like Weishaupt. He comes back into town, and here's a quick passage we're going to read, and this is going to give context to what we're going to learn about the revolutionary worldview from both Nesta Webster's books as well as James H. Billington's Fire in the Minds of Men. He comes back into town, and he's organizing these groups for freedom, for equality, for liberty. He says, this will make you laugh. What first of all affects them terribly is a uniform. There's nothing stronger than a uniform. I purposely invent ranks and positions. I have secretaries, secret stool pigeons, treasurers, chairmen, registrars, and adjuncts. It's all very much liked and is caught on splendidly. Then the next force, naturally, is sentimentality. With us, socialism spreads mostly through sentimentality. But the trouble here is with these biting lieutenants, you get burned every so often. Then come the out-and-out crooks. Well, they can be nice folk, very profitable on occasion, but they take up a lot of time, require constant surveillance. Well, and finally the main force, the cement that bonds it all, is shame at one's opinion. This is a real force. And who was it that worked? Who was that sweetie that labored so that there isn't a single idea of one's own left in anyone's head? They consider it shameful. Then he goes on. But if it's just lying there gaping at everybody, how can one help but filching it? As if you don't seriously believe success is possible. The belief is there. It's the wanting that's needed. Yes, precisely with their sort, success is possible. I tell you, I can get them to go through fire if I just tell them that they're not liberal enough. Fools reproach me for having hoodwinked everyone here with my central committee and numerous branches. Which he puts in quotations, as if it maybe is just mythological. You yourself once reproached me with that, but where is there any hoodwinking? The central committee is you and me, and there can be as many branches as they like. So he's talking to this other character who he's trying to bring in. Right now he's telling this character how he just lies to everybody else. And so why would this character that he's speaking to, Stavrogan, believe what he's telling him? Right? So basically he's telling him, look, I use their sentimentality. Socialism spreads through sentimentality. He later on goes to say that I'm not even a socialist, dude. I'm a scoundrel. I'm a rascal. right? I'm a scoundrel, he says. I use socialism. What I really want is power, he says. What I really want is to see the world on fire. What I really want is control. Right? His real goal, as you see him manipulating these characters around him, as he tells them, well, we're about freedom. We're going to bring about a utopia, freedom and equality and of human liberation. We're going to bring about this beautiful utopia. He's not bringing about freedom. Right? His whole thing is about stamping out people's free will, manipulating their free will, and getting them to do his bidding. That's his whole thing. That's his whole thing. So then he goes on. The other character tells him, essentially, plants the idea in his head, which, of course, this other character had already likely known. He said, no, I better give you the refrain. Here's your counting off on your fingers what forces make up a good circle. All this officialdom and sentimentality, it's good glue, but there's one thing better still. Get 4 members of a circle to bump off a 5th on the pretext of his being an informer. And with this shed blood, you'll immediately tie them together in a single knot. They'll become your slaves. They won't dare rebel or call you to accounts. So, the ultimate way to bind people together is get them to engage in something so shameful, so horrific, some crime, and perhaps even the ultimate crime of murder together. Get them to bump off another member of the society, and you can bind them together. Okay, so the idea of the circles, where did this come from? This isn't just something that Dostoevsky made up. This isn't just something that Dostoevsky here thought maybe it would be cool to put into his book. No, this is something that is historical. This is historical. Let me pull up. I've got screenshots here from this book called The Perfectibilists. All right, so now we're getting into Weishaupt. Weishaupt, who was influential on guys like Babeuf, French revolutionaries, Babeuf, Buonarotti, influential also on Bakunin and the anarchists. Weishaupt, who himself expressed idealistic utopian sentiment towards anarchy. Okay, so Adam Weishaupt, who was as I mentioned before, the professor at a Jesuit school, raised and trained by the Jesuit order, who based his entire secret society model on the Jesuits, who he claims to hate. Right? He claims to despise the Jesuits. He despises Christianity. We're going to speak about that a little bit later as well. The underlying and connecting kind of linchpin of this worldview of these revolutionaries really is a destructive, spiteful hatred of God, a destructive, spiteful hatred of Christ, of Christianity, of Christians, and of the culture that they live in. So, Weishaupt, influenced very much Dostoevsky. Where did that go? Bear with me here. Here we go. All right, so the Perfectibilists. As we talked about, as we discussed on the last stream, and we talked about Dostoevsky, his history as a member of these revolutionary groups. He was a member of this inner circle of a group led by a man called Speshnev. Right? So Speshnev was a seemingly a wicked man. Right now, I don't know much about his personal life except for what Dostoevsky had to say about him. And he made Dostoevsky feel like he was beholden to him after loaning him money, getting him in debt. This is a character in the life of Dostoevsky who was really influential and very dangerous. He was a magnanimous personality who Wait. Did I just go blank for a second? How's my connection? We good? All right, we're good. I think we're good. So Speshnev was the ringleader of this inner circle group within the secret society that was reading the socialist works by guys like Fourier. And this group was called the Petroshevsky Circle. Right? Remember, Dostoevsky was arrested as a part of this group that was plotting an armed insurrection. So the man that Dostoevsky called is Mephistopheles. He maybe had some dirt on him. Who knows? He seems to be a major influence on the character of Pyotr Stepanovich, who we're just quoting from here. But another influence on this character, Pyotr Stepanovich, is clearly Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt also, was really influential on Speshnev as well. So he wanted to bring about this peasant revolt, and he thought that that was going to be like the ideal way to bring out a revolution. And he wanted to establish collective farms, right? He wanted to force collectivization, which it's funny when you look at Russian history. The idea of forcing the collective farms, you already had the peasant commune, which was an effective way that the peasantry had organized itself for collective labor and use of land. All right, and the commune was effective. But he had this idea. Of course, these are people who've never grown food, who've never been involved in any work at all, right? You look at Weishaupt, he never really had a real job until he was a university professor, right? Lenin, he never had a job at all. He mooched off of his mother, right? Lenin mooched off of his mom. His father was an absentee father, right? Much like Pyotr Stepanovich here, much like Adam Weishaupt, whose father died when he was like 5. Lenin's father died when he was young as well. And his mother had to keep his, I think she had like 6 kids. Lenin had like 5 brothers and sisters. And he was always asking her for money. So the people who want to create these collective farms, the people who want to rewire your culture, isn't it weird how like these are usually just mooches? Dostoevsky noticed this, and there's actually a line from the father of Pyotr Stepanovich where he says, "Why are all these socialists so greedy? Why do they're always asking for money?" And this is when he's trying to deal with this financial situation. The character in the book is trying to deal with this financial situation, and he's referencing his son Pyotr, right, who just wants to travel, just wants to do him, just wants to, and has no love for his father. But of course, he would love some money. He would always love some resources. Yeah. So yeah, this guy Speshnev in Petroshevsky's circles, he was, let's see here. So he had these, kind of leanings towards communism, and he was actually a wealthy landowner. Never had to really earn a living at all, right? Inherited his wealth, but then of course gets involved in these groups of French socialists, Polish emigre, who are discussing the ideas of using secret societies, actually secret institutions, parallel institutions, to organize worker rebellions. Right? So people who've never worked want to organize worker rebellions for freedom. Right? When you look at what these people end up implementing, it's always, usually these groups will start with a constitutional republic to replace the monarchy, right? Which is what they did in many places. This was the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution, the replacement of monarchy and the traditional monarchy. They wanted to replace it with a constitutional monarchy. And of course, that immediately failed, and the Bolsheviks took over, burned everything to the ground, used the kind of useful idiots in the lodges, right, in the Grand Orient lodges. A lot of the February Revolution in 1917 was organized through the British, through the embassy, through the lodges of Masonry, and by the aristocracy. So this guy Speshnev, wealthy landowner, lived in Paris for a long time, lived in Vienna, lived in Dresden, okay, immersed in the Enlightenment ideals, immersed in secret societies, perhaps Masonry, but most definitely the ideas of the Illuminists. Right? So he became familiar with Baruel's book. Baruel was I think he was a Jesuit priest who published a book exposing the inner workings and worldview of the Illuminists. And his book was called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism. Right? So the Jacobins in the theory of Buonarotti, the Jacobins, and this is a really popular conception at the time, that the Jacobins came directly out of the secret societies of the Illuminists. All right, the Jacobins came out of the Illuminists, and these Illuminists brought about the French Revolution. Was a popular idea. This was a popular idea not later on, but even popular during the French Revolution. And then the setting up of that, the French Constitution in 1793, a lot of people said this was the influence. The Jacobins were directly influenced by these secret orders and these secret societies that had become en vogue at the time, and it spread like wildfire all across Europe. So Speshnev, wealthy landowner, gets involved in this Petrushevsky circle and gets obsessed with Barwell's account of the Jacobins. Like, he used to read this out loud in his little group and said, we need to organize ourselves along this line. All right, so this book that was published to expose the Illuminists ends up being a blueprint for people to create more of these Illuminist groups. So a lot of people now people who call themselves researchers, right? And by that, I mean like people who've maybe looked at a few Wikipedia pages and watched some YouTube videos, right? So the people who consider themselves free thinkers and whatnot nowadays, a lot of them become obsessed with some of these ideas of the Illuminati, right? It's the Illuminati's behind everything. It's the Illuminati, right? Without actually looking at the history of this, if you just kind of hear a lot of the theories that people throw out there, it starts to sound kooky, it starts to sound wacky. But really, there is historical reality to this group. It was a real group founded by Weishaupt in 1776. Right? So May 1st, 1776, Adam Weishaupt with a group of 4 other people, right? The group of 5, which is all throughout Dostoevsky's book here. Pyotr Stepanovich comes to this town to create a committee of 5, a group of 5, a circle, as he calls it. The symbol of the circle with the dot in the center was the primary symbol, the cipher used by the Illuminists in their writings to each other to represent their group and their order. Right now, Weishaupt first wanted to call them the perfectibilists. Then he wanted to call them the bee order, the bee order, because he really liked the symbolism of the beehive, which is a symbolism of a 2-tiered society, right? The queen bee, who is created ritually by the action and the work of the worker bees, the queen bee that gets to eat the special food, the queen bee that's the only one that gets to breed, right? They love this symbolism of the inner elite, the queen bee, and all the worker bees organized around them in this cellular manner, right, of these hives that can then go out and create new hives. So this, the bee, the beehive is a dynamic symbol and a very multi-tiered and multifaceted symbol that a lot of these secret societies become obsessed with. And Weishaupt loved the idea of the bee as a name for his order, but he ended up landing on the Illuminists, the order of Illuminism, which later became known as Illuminati. And so Barwell's account was really influential on this guy Speshnev, who was really influential on Dostoevsky, and ended up getting him nearly killed by getting him involved in this group. Dostoevsky, of course, did this by his free will, but he was involved in this group trying to bring about armed insurrection. So let's see. A quote here from Alpha Venturi. This is from the book The Perfectibilist. He says it's likely that Speshnev intended to refer not to Desemy but to Barwell when he's talking about this book. He used to make his friends read the works by the famous Jesuit against the French Revolution. In it, he said, a detailed description could be found of the conspiracy of the Illuminati founded by Weishaupt, which he put forward as a model. His friend Mombelli said that it was the most dangerous book there is, as methods are found in it which otherwise would never have come into people's minds. Now, so that is a really interesting concept, right? This, we talked about this before with Father Deacon Ananias and Jay on that stream. We talked about how the conspiracy candy culture does end up becoming a recruiting ground for secret societies, for Masonry, for the occult. Right, these people that get obsessed with the occult and they really start to believe that they're going to get, special power. All right, and these occult orders, they do offer a level of worldly power. They do offer a level of uh, of knowledge, but and by knowledge I mean communion with destruction, destructive ideas. These esoteric societies, these orders, which Weishaupt based his on Jesuitism, on the Jesuits, where everybody's spying on each other. Right? Everybody's spying on each other, watching each other, breaking down each other's psyche, learning the inner machinations of the soul in order to manipulate each other, is what Weishaupt employed within his group of Illuminists. And in order to send people out and recruit people from the upper echelons of society to get as close to the levers of power as possible to bring about a world revolution. So we're going to get some quotes from Weishaupt in a bit, but just fascinating that Dostoevsky, in hanging out with this guy Speshnev, was learning about these groups. And Speshnev actually tried to create a subversive group along the lines of this Illuminist model. Now, whether Speshnev, of course, who was a landed aristocrat, or whether Speshnev, this spoiled brat aristocrat, actually was in contact with other people outside of his little cell that he tried to create, it's unknown, it's speculation. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But the model and the methodology that he used is the same as Weishaupt. Okay, so... all right, let's move on. So I think that's that is very poignant, especially that little quote there about Speshnev's activity and obsessing over it and reading and forcing his friends to read that book. So who else did Weishaupt and his group influence? We're going to talk about Buonarotti a little bit later. We're going to talk about Lenin, but let's talk a little bit about the ideas of Weishaupt. Right, so Adam Weishaupt, the order of Illuminists, he wanted to call it the perfectibilists, right? This idea of the perfection of man, of the eternal striving for the perfection of man, and man ultimately being infinitely perfectible is what Weishaupt was into. That was his whole thing, the ideas of the Enlightenment. Right? Essentially, it was the idea of man becoming God. This was his M.O. The Enlightenment ideals started this fire of the revolution, right? That fire in the minds of men. And Weishaupt embodied completely the ideals of the Enlightenment. Where did that go? I got some quotes here. And Weishaupt was influential, right? Weishaupt influenced Thomas Jefferson, who said he called him a philanthropist. Thomas Jefferson said he was a great philanthropist. So you can trust him, right? If you read like a liberal apologist for the Illuminists today, they will say, well, this was just a conspiracy theory. People got really freaked out by this group because they didn't like the ideas of freeing man and of freeing your mind, right? You're gonna free your mind. The revolution is in the mind. A revolution of the mind is what Weishaupt was proposing. Where did that go? So the revolution of the mind is what he thought was what was necessary. Okay, he was. Where is that? All right, sorry for the break there. He was a child of the Enlightenment, right? So he was raised by people who were obsessed with, Kantian idealism, people who were in love with the idea of reason, right? The exaltation of reason. And again, the Enlightenment is not what we're sold on. Right? The Enlightenment is Illuminism. Right? The Illuminist ideals are the implementation to an extreme of Enlightenment ideology, of rationalism. So he believed that you're going to bring about this perfect rational order. He thought that there was the perfectibility of man was endless. That man could be made to essentially become a god. I gotta find this. There's a great quote here. There it is. So the letter from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison from 31st January 1800. He talks about the book by Abba Barruel's book exposing the Jacobins. And Thomas Jefferson was a close associate of the Jacobins. After the American Revolution, many of the American revolutionaries went over to France and were involved in the Jacobin clubs, were involved in the revolutionary activities there, including Ben Franklin. Bonneville was close friends with Thomas Paine, who was in a menage a trois with Bonneville and his wife. They were both people who held the same worldview and had the same obsession with destruction of church, of throne and altar of the church and the state, as Weishaupt had. So, all right, here we go. From Thomas Jefferson to James Madison. Jefferson says, Weishaupt seems to be an enthusiastic philanthropist. He is among those, as you know, the excellent Price and Priestley also are, who believe in the indefinite perfectibility of man. He thinks he may in time be rendered so perfect that he will be able to govern himself in every circumstance so as to injure none, and to do all the good he can, to leave government no occasion to exercise their powers over him, and of course to render political government useless. This, you know, is Godwin's doctrine, and this is what Robinson, who wrote the Proofs of a Conspiracy, Barwell and Morse have called a conspiracy against all government. Weishaupt believes that to promote this perfection of the human character was the object of Jesus Christ. That his intention was simply to reinstate natural religion, and by diffusing the light of his morality to teach us to govern ourselves, his precepts are the love of God and love of our neighbor. And by teaching innocence of conduct, he expected to place men in their natural state of liberty and equality. He says no one ever laid a surer foundation for liberty than our Grand Master, the Masonic term again, Jesus of Nazareth. He believes the Freemasons were originally possessed of the true principles and object of Christianity and still have preserved some of them by tradition, but much disfigured. The means he proposes to effect this improvement of human nature are to enlighten men, to correct their morals and inspire them with benevolence. Secure of our success, he says, we abstain from violent commotions, to have foreseen the happiness of and posterity, and to have prepared it by irreproachable means, suffices for our felicity. This tranquility of our consciences is not troubled by the reproach of aiming at the ruin or overthrow of states or thrones, as Weishaupt lived under the tyranny of a despot and priests. He knew that caution was necessary even in spreading information and the principles of pure morality. He proposed, therefore, to lead the Freemasons to adopt this object and to make the objects of their institution the diffusion of science and virtue. He proposed to initiate new members into this body by gradations proportioned to his fears of the thunderbolts of tyranny. So he's a good guy, says Jefferson. He thinks that this is a person who was fighting for equality, right? He's fighting for liberty and equality. And that's what Jesus would want, right? Jesus was really a communist revolutionary. Jesus was trying to abolish private property, to abolish the family, to abolish the state, and to put us back into our natural state. So they all take this kind of Rousseauian position on man and nature, right? Man has to go back to nature and build a culture on reason and on true science. But there's so much schizophrenia in these arguments, right? Now, Weishaupt himself believed that science was fake and gay. He was like, we don't need this. If we were really in our natural state and in pure nature, we wouldn't have property, right? Because the fall to Weishaupt into which he got these ideas from Rousseau. Rousseau got these ideas as well from like Pythagoras. They're all obsessed with these Pythagorean cults of complete equality, where private property is the fall of man, right? private property, religion, belief, faith. These are all superstitious advancements of man that are destroying man, right? Being able to say that, this land is mine or this property is mine, that's bad, that's terrible. Yeah, and in order to fix this, of course, we're going to look at the methodologies that Weishaupt uses to bring this about. But remember, this is Thomas Jefferson. This is Jefferson, American founding father, all right, the great libertarian Jefferson. Everybody, all the Americans loved Jefferson. All the people who venerate the American revolutionaries think that this guy's great, and he highly venerates the Illuminists and Weishaupt. In fact, seems to be quite well versed in this in his letter to Madison. Seems to almost be telling James Madison, hey, calm down, this is all good, right? Almost maybe even opening the door for Madison to become involved in certain revolutionary activities that would reflect the goals and vision of the Illuminists. Okay, so next. Where did that go? There it is. All right, so Weishaupt, what did he really believe? What was he really into? Okay, we're going to look at some quotes here. Here is a quote from Weishaupt. The first stage in the life of the whole human race is savagery, rough nature, in which the family is the only society and hunger and thirst are easily satisfied, in which man enjoys the two most excellent goods, equality and liberty, to their fullest extent. And by family, he means like a tribe. He's like, we got to go back to being like we was caveman, right? We was caveman, but we were so happy back then. We was cave kings. The first stage in the life of the whole human race is savagery, rough nature, in which the family is the only society, and hunger and thirst are easily satisfied, in which man enjoys the two most excellent goods, equality and liberty, to the fullest extent. In these circumstances, health was his usual condition. Happy men, who were not yet enough enlightened to lose their peace of mind and to be conscious of the unhappy mainsprings and causes of our misery, love of power, envy, illnesses, and all the results of imagination. The manner in which man fell from his primitive state of felicity is then described. As families increased, means of subsistence began to lack, the nomadic life ceased, property was instituted, men established themselves firmly, and through agriculture, families drew near to each other, thereby language developed, and through living together, men began to measure themselves against each other, etc. But here was the cause of the downfall of freedom. Equality vanished. Men felt now new unknown needs. So this is from Nesta H. Webster's 1924 book, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements. So she's quoting directly from Weishaupt's work, which was all published. He published a bunch of books after the group of the Illuminists was suppressed. I think this was like 1790. Maybe it was like the mid 1790s that the group was suppressed. They're banned in Bavaria. He ended up going off to Switzerland. Switzerland becoming a hot spot for the revolutionaries, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So men became dependent like minors under the guardianship of kings. The human must attain its majority and become self-governing. So Weishaupt says, why should it be impossible that the human race should attain to its highest perfection the capacity to guide itself? Why should anyone be eternally led who understands how to lead himself? Who has the need of another depends on him and has resigned his rights. So to need little is the first step to freedom. Therefore, savages and the most highly enlightened are perhaps the only free men. The art of more and more limiting one's needs is at the same time the art of attaining freedom. So it's like this primitivist asceticism that he's writing that we need to embrace. So a lot of these ideas again come from Rousseau, but none of these people end up living like this. This is what's strange. He wants to bring us back to this primitive state, yet he spends all his time trying to infiltrate, and co-opt the upper echelons of society in order to have more money, power, and influence. It's completely schizoid. Weishaupt then goes on to show how the further evil of patriotism arose. He says, with the origin of nations and peoples, the world ceased to be a great family, a single kingdom. So we were all just one family. We was kangs. We was a family. We was tribes, but then it got messed up by people getting private property. Right? We was kings, but then we had private property. So he says, the great tie of nature was torn after we left the single kingdom, right? So this is the fall of man, how it became a virtue to magnify one's fatherland and at the expense of whoever was not enclosed within its limits. Now, as a means to this narrow end, it was allowed to despise and outwit foreigners, and indeed, even to insult them. This virtue was called patriotism. So then arose out of patriotism localism, the family spirit, and finally egoism. Diminish patriotism, these men will learn to know each other again as such. Their dependence on each other will be lost. The bond of union will widen out. So if you're dependent on somebody, right? Like if you need, if you're dependent, like if you're cohabitating with your wife and you have mutually dependent beneficial relationship, that's just slavery to him, right? That's the fall, right? We've got to be savages. All right, so his whole theory, he tries to sound like he's, oh, this is so nice, this is so good. We're going to bring about this great resurgence of reason, right? But then it's like, well, no, language itself is part of the fall to him, right? Language and people communicating, people talking, that's the patriarchy. Language is the patriarchy, private property is the patriarchy, and the abolition of private property is the goal. So he says, talking about the redemption of the human race, he says, these means are secret schools of wisdom. These were from all time the archives of nature and of human rights. Through them will man be saved from his fall. Princes and nations will disappear without violence from the earth. Without violence, huh? We'll see about that. We'll talk about that a bit. Through them, man will be saved from his fall. Princes and nations will disappear without violence from the earth. The human race will become one family, and the world the abode of reasonable men. Morality alone will bring about this change imperceptibly. Every father of a family will be, as formerly Abraham and the patriarchs, the priest and unfettered lord of his family, and reason will be the only code of man. This is one of our greatest secrets. He says, this, our great and unforgettable master, Jesus of Nazareth, appeared at a time in the world when it was sunk in depravity. Now let's clarify. The progression of thought in Weishaupt, who, again, fatherless child, dad died when he's 5, gets raised by these Enlightenment kind of aristocrats, gets sent off to university, gets further indoctrinated in the ideals of the Enlightenment. That becomes his dad, right? The Enlightenment ideals become his God, become his father. He gets surrounded by these Jesuit kind of father figure type dudes, ends up just adopting and co-opting the Jesuit structure. Now, later, one of the members of his order, who ended up leaving the order after, I think, like 8 years of involvement with Weishaupt, von Knigge. He gets an N-word pass. Knigge, von Knigge, who helped to ingratiate Weishaupt into these Masonic orders and kind of subvert Masonry. He would later claim that, well, Weishaupt was a tyrant. He said Weishaupt was a complete tyrant and was hyper-controlling, narcissistic douchebag. And he said he's basically like a Jesuit. And I think he even claimed Weishaupt might even be still working for the Jesuits. So, and the people get their pet theories. Oh, the Jesuits run everything. The specific ethnic group runs everything. The Hindus, they run everything. All right. The Hindus run everything. The Jesuits run everything. And there are aspects of infiltration that obviously Jesuitism. When you look at the history of Masonry, for instance, I think Buonarotti and Bonneville both believed that Jesuits had influenced Masonry. Right now, and they were also really into the ideas of Weishaupt's Illuminism. So they would have held that Illuminist infiltration of Masonry is good, when the Illuminists infiltrated Masonry, they were always telling everybody that they're there to fight the influence of the Jesuits, right? So they're the enemy, the phantom enemy or real enemy that they conjured was the Jesuit order. And of course, the Jesuits were there to fight the ideals of the Reformation, right? To fight the spreading of Protestantism and a lot of these groups like the Illuminists. So you have this like infighting that's happening. You have this interpenetration of these groups, and it gets complicated, it gets complex, it gets messy. So we're not trying to try to create like some exact genealogy of these revolutionaries. That's endless, right? There are endless connections between these characters, and there really is kind of an interesting apostolic succession of the revolutionaries from Weishaupt to Babeuf to Buonarotti, through to Lenin. But we'll get into some of that, but that's not the most interesting thing here. We want to focus on the ideas. We're going to focus on the ideas, and this is what, in the book Demons by Dostoevsky, this is what he's doing. He's showing us the ideas. He's showing us the ideals. He's showing us the worldview of these people like Weishaupt. And he's predicting the exact worldview and the exact actions that would be taken by guys like Lenin and Stalin, which is one of the most fascinating aspects of Dostoevsky's Demons. So anyways, back here to, all right, so that last quote. Weishaupt hated Christianity, right? Believed that this is all just superstition. We're going to free man from the bondage of the superstitious past of religion. We're going to free man from the bondage of the awful yoke of religion, and we're gonna make him a new man. Von Koenigen ended up influencing him to kind of change his tune, and instead of trying to crush Christianity, to co-opt the language of it in order to bring in Christians, to bring in especially Protestant pastors. And they bragged to each other in private letters that they did bring in quite a few Protestants into his order. So a lot of Lutheran pastors ended up becoming a part of the Illuminists. A lot of them were already involved in Masonry and became part of his Illuminist group. So he says that, Jesus is the first revolutionary, right? Jesus just wants you to have no private property. Jesus was a commie. Jesus was a communist revolutionary. Of course, the word communism hadn't really been used yet. The ideals of communism ended up being put forth by I think Restif named communism, was the first one to use the name communism. But the ideals of the communists, the abolition of property, the abolition of the state, the abolition of family, the dissolving of the state, this all comes straight from Weishaupt. And he didn't just invent these ideas either. Right, he's referencing Pythagoras, the Pythagoreans, the Manichaeans. He's influenced by all these occult groups, and he's selling people on reason, right? Reason and logic. Hey, we're going to make you free. You're going to make everyone... He tells different people different things, which is what Pyotr Stepanovich in the quote a minute ago in Dostoevsky's book shows as well. He's like, use sentimentality to bring about socialism. But Pyotr, the character... he hates sentimentality, right? He mocks sentimentality. Weishaupt, that's straight from Weishaupt, right? So Weishaupt also hated sentimentality, but said we use sentimentality. We will use Christianity. We will use Masonry. He hated a lot of the ideas and the rituals of Masonry, but liked some of what he considered like the older mysteries, but didn't like a lot of the superstition that was surrounding the Enlightenment folks, which sounds like a contradiction. Superstition, Enlightenment? I thought Enlightenment was about bringing about the end of superstition. No, the Enlightenment was not about bringing an end to superstition and reason and logic. Right? This is the rhetoric of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment brought about a resurgence of paganism, of neo-paganism, spiritism. All these people like Isaac Newton were all involved in all sorts of weird occult stuff. The Enlightenment was the spreading of Masonry, was the spreading of Illuminism, the spreading of occultism. A lot of these Enlightenment people, they're all messianic. This messianic idea of man, not the apotheosis of man becoming God. apart from God, man becoming his own God. No one has so cleverly concealed the high meaning of his teaching, and no one finally has so surely and easily directed man onto the path of freedom as our great Master Jesus of Nazareth. This secret meaning and natural consequence of his teaching he hid completely, for Jesus had a secret doctrine, as we see in more than one place of the Scriptures. Another quote there from Weishaupt. Isn't it funny how when you read Thomas Jefferson's quote, which we just read, he is quoting the writings of Weishaupt? Isn't that strange? No, it's not strange at all, because a lot of these people were reading each other's writings. They were involved in the lodges with each other, and he also calls him our Grand Master Jesus of Nazareth over in Thomas Jefferson's letter to James Madison. So Jefferson directly quoting from Weishaupt, telling James Madison how cool he is. So Weishaupt believed that Hiram Abeth, here he says, I say that Hiram is Christ. Hiram Abeth is Christ. Hiram Abeth, the rebuilding Solomon's temple. Right, all this is kind of allegory within the ritual of Masonry that was co-opted by the Illuminist group. So the Illuminists also, in their mockery of Christianity, would take, instead of their Christian names, right, they would take baptismal demonic names, basically, right? So Spartacus was Weishaupt's name. Weishaupt was Spartacus, named after the slave, the leader of the slave uprising there. So let's see. You cannot imagine what consideration and sensation our priest's degree is arousing, says Spartacus, talking about the new degrees that he's adding within the initial 3 levels of his group. The most wonderful thing is that great Protestant and Reformed theologians who belong to the, and he uses the cipher, the circle with the dot in the middle of it, which is who belong to Illuminism, still believe that the religious teaching imparted in it contains the true and genuine spirit of the Christian religion. Oh, men, what cannot you be persuaded? I never thought that I should become the founder of a new religion. That's from his notes. That's from his letters, rather. So Weishaupt's letters bragging about how these, isn't this funny? So Protestant Reformed theologians getting involved in Illuminism. Yeah, and this is no surprise, because a lot of these Protestant Reformed theologians were influenced by the Kabbalists, right? They were studying Kabbalah in these universities. Right? They were studying the Zohar. They were consulting with rabbis. A lot of the Protestant theologians were consulting with these rabbis, these Kabbalist rabbis and Talmudic rabbis, for exposition of an interpretation of Old Testament scripture. So Weishaupt loved bringing in Protestant clergy and illuminizing them. He said, through the influence of the brothers, he writes, the Jesuits have been removed from all professorships, and the University of Ingolstadt has been quite cleansed of them. So anyway, so this battle with the Jesuits, but then embracing of all these Protestant theologians, right? The embracing of the Protestant theologians who had rejected the tradition of Roman Catholicism, which, of course, coming from an Orthodox perspective, we do have a little bit of sympathy for the Protestant reformers, not these illuminated ones who embraced full on heretical Manichaean ideas in their like fire worship Bavarian Illuminatus sect, but the rejection of Jesuitism. You can see why people would want to reject it. So anyways, I thought those were some interesting quotes to bring up, especially the Jefferson one. That Jefferson one when he's directly quoting Weishaupt, calling Christ our Grand Master, as if he's, this Lodge Master, Jesus of Nazareth, and the influence and the trying to bring in the corruption of Christianity through this group. So the Illuminists had a structure of circles, and those circles would spawn other circles. This is a visual representation of that. This is directly from Weishaupt's work. So, circles within circles within circles, spawning other circles. We mentioned also this kind of inverse baptism. There were other strange rites that many people described, including the use of blood in initiation rituals, animal blood, perhaps other blood, perhaps human blood, not sure, but yeah, most definitely animal blood. The influence that... All right, so there are other quotes from Weishaupt that are fascinating, but we got a bunch of other stuff to get to. So we shall... We've talked a little bit about Weishaupt. This isn't just going to be an in-depth study of the works of Weishaupt, but he is a fascinating figure. We're going to move on to another character influenced by the Illuminists, and that is Buonarotti. Now, Buonarotti is not very well known. Buonarotti is not very well known at all. He's a fascinating character. He's a really interesting character. Buonarotti was kind of like the first disciple of this new religion of Babeufism. Right? He's the first apostle of the revolutionary worldview, and that's what he's called here in Fire in the Minds of Men by James H. Billington. So Buonarotti, let's see, page 88. Now we are jumping over here to Fire in the Minds of Men. Now Buonarotti is a character that is fully lampooned and represented, as well as, Weishaupt over here in the character of Stepan Trofimovich, and kind of Stepan Trofimovich's character as well as Shigoyov's character, both in Dostoevsky's Demons, were influenced by Buonarotti, were influenced by Babeuf, and were influenced by Weishaupt. So first of all, we're going to go back to Demons by Dostoevsky. And we're going to pull up this quote here. One of my favorite quotes from this book, because this section of the book completely reveals the revolutionaries' intention, and in the laying out of what is called Shigoyovism in the book here, which Shigoyov is the name of a character, right? So what we see here, this is the seed of Leninism. This is the seed of Trotskyism. This is basically what comes to be Stalinism. And this was published in 1872. This was written around 1871. And in this scene, Pyotr Stepanovich has gotten together a group of liberals and revolutionaries and students and seminarians. Remember, Lenin was a seminarian. Stalin was a seminary student. And these people discussing the new ideas together have come to discuss what they're planning, what they're plotting. And Pyotr has organized this group and this meeting of this group. And it's a hilarious scene in many ways. I forgot to mention again in this episode, this book is actually very funny. This book is actually is really humorous. So this group gets together in the chapter called With Our People. And first of all, they can't even agree whether they're having a meeting or not. And they have to take a vote if they're even having a meeting. So they take a vote if they're having a meeting, and then they get confused. Well, do we raise our hand if we're having a meeting, or do we raise our hand if we're not having a meeting? They do it both ways, just in case. So the revolutionaries, the libertarians, and the nihilists all get together to discuss this, and this liberal thinker Shigoyov comes and lays out his plan for an arranging of future society. And this is based, a lot of this, you'll see elements of Henry Saint-Simon in here. You're going to see elements of Babeuf. You're going to see elements of Lenin, of Stalin, of Marx. But it cuts to the core of all of it. Dostoevsky cuts to the soul of all of this. Remember, Dostoevsky was a repentant revolutionary who got arrested for revolutionary actions and ended up leaving the movement, repenting of this, and becoming a Christian, right? Becoming a God-fearing Orthodox Christian. And this book is his warning to the coming generations, and to his generation that he's critiquing here, about what could happen if you fall into the furnace of this revolutionary thought. Remember that fire quote we read in the beginning. The fire it's hypnotic, right? It's hard not to look at a fire. It's beautiful. It's horrific, but nobody can stop looking at the fire. Right? Now, a single flame on a candle lit in front of an icon was a traditional way that people would very often see fire at this time and in the generations coming. But they were at a transition. Right? The fire was leaving the icon lamps in the homes and would ultimately be used for something else. That fire that would traditionally be lighting the prayer corners in these homes in Russia would leave those prayer corners, and something else would happen with that fire. And the illumination of the enlightenment and the worship of fire, rather than the use of the controlled use of the human will to worship God, man turns that will and worship to himself. It is unleashed absolute chaos. What we have here in this passage, Shigoyov lays out his revolutionary Illuminist model for organizing society. You'll see how this is going to tie in with the thought of Weishaupt, with the thought of Babeuf and Lenin, Stalin, and all the revolutionaries. Having devoted my energy to studying the question of social organization of the future society, which is to replace the present one, I've come to the conclusion that all creators of social systems from ancient times to our year 1870 have been dreamers, tale-tellers, fools who contradicted themselves and understood precisely nothing of natural science or of that savage animal known as man. Plato, Rousseau, Fourier, aluminum columns. All this is fit perhaps for sparrows, but not for human society. But since the future social form is necessary precisely now, when we are finally all going to act, so as to stop any further thinking about it, I am suggesting my own system of world organization. Here it is. He struck the notebook. I wanted to explain my book to the gathering in the briefest way possible, but I see that I will have to add a great deal of verbal clarification, and therefore the whole explanation will take at least 10 evenings, according to the number of chapters in my book. Laughter was heard. Besides that, I announced ahead of time that my system is not finished. More laughter. I got entangled in my own data, and my conclusion directly contradicts the original idea from which I start. Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. I will add, however, that apart from my solution to the social formula, there can be no other. Starting with unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. So, Weishaupt, Babeuf, Lenin, Stalin, this is what happens. Liberty and equality cannot exist together in the way that they're sold to you. Liberty from what? Liberty from what? Unlimited liberty. Liberty to do what? To do as you will? What do you mean by liberty? What do the revolutionaries mean by liberty? Liberty and equality, diametrically opposed. You think the German and American bankers, the Hindu bankers that funded Lenin, Trotsky, right? You think Jacob Schiff, you think Warburg, you think that they want to bring you liberty and equality? You think Lenin, who sells you on liberty, ends up being a complete maniacal despot? Total tyranny. These people, they bring about complete tyranny. In the name of liberty, you get complete tyranny. So that quote right there, I got tangled in my own data. My conclusion directly contradicts the original idea from which I start. Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. So Shigoyov goes on. There's a little bit back and forth. There's kind of a funny back and forth there. They kind of mock him. They're like, "What are you even talking about, dude? This is ridiculous. We don't have 10 nights to talk about how to lay out the future society. These are people who they're revolutionaries that want to change the world, but they don't have 10 nights to listen to discuss these ideas, right? So anyways, this other guy pipes in. He says, "That's not the point here." The lame man finally mixed in. Generally, he spoke with a certain mocking smile, as it were, so that it might not have been difficult to tell whether he was speaking sincerely or joking. That's not the point here, gentlemen. Mr. Shigoyov is all too seriously devoted to his task, and what's more is too modest. I know his book, he suggests, as a final solution to the question, the division of mankind into two unequal parts. 1/10 is granted freedom of person and unlimited rights over the remaining 9/10. These must lose their person and turn into something like a herd, and in unlimited obedience through a series of regenerations attain to primeval innocence, something like the primeval paradise. Though, by the way, they will have to work. Their measures proposed by the author for removing the will of 9/10 of mankind and remaking them into a herd by means of a re-educating of entire generations are quite remarkable, based on natural facts and extremely logical. One may disagree with certain conclusions, but it is difficult to doubt the author's intelligence and knowledge. It's a pity the stipulation of 10 evenings is totally incompatible with the circumstances. Otherwise, we might hear a great many interesting things. So, liberty and equality for everybody. You know what that really means? It means freedom and complete liberty for 1/10 of the population in Shigoyovism, and then 9/10 of the population, they get equality. And that equality is brought about by a re-education of generations, right? And a perpetual revolution re-educating these people. That's really the Illuminist vision. That's the real Illuminist vision, is complete re-education of everybody, redistribution of wealth. Oh, private property is, we can't have property owned by anyone, right? That's what the revolutionaries say. This is Marxism as well. You know, private property is theft. Weishaupt said that property is theft. Well, then who's going to own everything in the eschaton of the revolutionaries? When the revolution's finished, who's going to own everything? So like Marx doesn't give you a vision. He says you're going to have the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, how are you going to get to the state of the stateless society? How are you going to get there in like Marxism? Well, this is what Dostoevsky is brilliantly showing here in a real short and sweet way. Well, you're going to have 1/10 of the population with freedom. 9/10 of the population will be a herd. They'll be re-educated to have no free will, and they will work for the other 1/10 of the population that will have complete freedom. So y'all get equality down there. All right, 10%, okay, we'll get equality too with each other, but we'll get freedom and liberty. And down below, 9/10, well, you guys will have equality, total equality. Well, who's going to own all this property? So in Weishaupt talking about, we got to go back to this primeval state of like the family. It's almost, it's a primitive idea of like the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the party owns everything, right? You're not going to have these people. They're never going to get to a state where everybody just willingly is going to be, is going to have the natural communist consciousness. That's why Engels called it false consciousness, right? False consciousness is when the workers don't know what's best for them. Well, we want to give them freedom and equality. Well, they don't really understand what freedom is yet. So we have to teach them what freedom means and what equality means. And we have to force them. We have to force these ideals upon them and re-educate them. So the re-education camps, the gulag, it's all there. So then this other guy pipes in, right? This guy, Liamshin. Instead of paradise, Liamshin shouted, I'd take these 9/10 of mankind. Remember the 9/10, they're going to be equal. They're going to be a herd. I'll take these 9/10 of mankind, since there's really nothing to do about them, and blow them sky high and leave just a bunch of learned people who would then start living happily in an educated way. So just, radical depopulation. Only a buffoon could talk like that, the girl student flared up. He is a buffoon, but he's useful, Madame Virginsky whispered to her. And that might be the best solution to the problem, Shigoyov turned hotly to Liamshin. You, of course, don't even know what a profound thing you've managed to say, Mr. Funny Fellow, but since your idea is almost unrealizable, we must limit ourselves to the earthly paradise, if that's what we're calling it. That's nonsense, however, escaped as it were from Verkhoviensky. Nevertheless, he went on cutting his nails with complete indifference and without raising his eyes. Why nonsense, sir? The lame man picked up. Why nonsense precisely? Mr. Shigoyov is somewhat of a fanatic of his love for mankind, but remember that in Fourier and Cabet and even in Proudhon himself, there are many quite despotic and fantastic pre-solutions to the problem. Mr. Shigoyov perhaps resolves the matter even more soberly than they do. I assure you that after reading his book, it is almost impossible to disagree with some things. He is perhaps least distant of all from realism, and his earthly paradise is almost the real one, and the very one mankind sighs for the loss of, if indeed it ever existed. So you're going to have this. The part of the people are going to be these, the primitive herd people, and then you'll have the elite in Shigoyovism that will be, the illuminated ones. They are the ones who can decide what the equality is, who will decide how to freely distribute the property that's owned by everyone. Oh, everyone owns it, but the inner party, the inner circle, will distribute that. You see the same idea in the 20th century. You see the same idea in H.G. Wells, right? The same idea you see in Charles Galton Darwin. You see all those same ideas getting spread and getting pushed. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so then they start talking about, well, yeah, maybe we do have to kill everyone off. We have to kill everyone off, but should we do it slow or should we do it fast? So this other guy jumps in. Excuse me, sir. The lame man was twitching in his chair. Though we are provincials, we are most certainly deserving of pity for that. Nevertheless, we know that so far nothing new has happened in the world that we should weep over having missed it. Now it is being suggested to us through various strewn about leaflets of foreign manufacture that we close ranks and start groups with the sole purpose of universal destruction, under the pretext that however you try to cure the world, you're not going to cure it, but by radically lopping off 100 million heads, thereby relieving ourselves, we can more assuredly jump over the little ditch. A beautiful thought, no doubt, but one at least as incompatible with reality as Shigoyovism, to which you adverted just now with such disdain. So there were pamphlets circulating in the novel, and this is all for reflecting the reality of it. There was propaganda circulating among the elite, among the aristocracy, promoting these ideas of, well, we need radical depopulation, we need an armed uprising, we need complete and total revolution. So anyways, they start babbling. They're fighting about how are we going to do this, what are we going to do, and discussing, well, should we do it fast or should we do it slow, right? He says, should we leap over the chasm? Let's see, talking aside, for we can't babble for another 30 years if we've been babbling for the last 30. I ask you, which is dearer to you? The slow way that consists in the writing of social novels and the bureaucratic predetermining of human destinies on paper for thousands of years to come, with despotism meanwhile gobbling up the roasted hunks that are flying into your mouths of themselves, but that you let go past your mouths. With despotism meanwhile gobbling up the roasted hunks that are flying into your mouths of themselves, but that you let go past your mouths, or do you hold with a quick solution, whatever it may consist of, which will finally untie all hands and give mankind the freedom to organize socially by itself, and that in reality, not on paper? 100 million heads, they shout, and maybe that's just a metaphor, but why be afraid of them if, with these slow paper reveries, despotism in some 100 years will eat up not 100, but 500 million heads? Note, too, that the incurable patient is not going to be cured anyway, no matter what prescriptions are given it on paper, and on the contrary, if there's a delay, it will turn so rotten that it will infect us as well and corrupt all the fresh forces which can still be counted on now, so that they'll finally go under. I fully agree that babbling liberally and eloquently is extremely pleasant, while acting is a bit rough. Well, anyhow, I'm not a good speaker. I came here with communications, and therefore I ask the whole honorable company not even to vote, but to declare directly and simply which is more fun for you, a snail's pace through the swamp or full steam across it. And then some people are like, yeah, let's go full steam across it. And some people have reservations, and then they basically all end up agreeing, right? All the liberals are like, yeah, fine, let's just 100 million heads, quick, fiery revolution. That's what we're down for. All right, so that's from Dostoevsky's Demons. Excuse me. I'm a little parched. I need some of my fresh cockroach milk here. My fresh soy-fed WEF approved cockroach milk. All right. Now that we've learned about Shigoyovism, Pyotr Stepanovich brought in this guy Shigoyov. They discuss his ideas. And then Pyotr Stepanovich, later in that chapter, which we're going to quote from before the end of this. We'll quote from that in a minute here. Shigoyovism is Baboofism. We're going to learn about Babouf and Buonarotti. It is Bolshevism, right? What they just described, that's Bolshevism. What they just described is Bolshevism, which is the logical conclusion of Marxism. It is Leninism, and it is Baboofism. It's also, in many ways, the Great Reset. Isn't that interesting? All right, so Babouf. So Babouf, the trial of Babouf happened after the fall of Robespierre. His trial for what he called the conspiracy of equals. This is a well-documented event during the French Revolution. His conspiracy of equals is what we're going to discuss now, and namely his first apostle. His first apostle, Buonarotti. Buonarotti, you know what's interesting? Buonarotti was a descendant of Michelangelo. So Buonarotti, descendant of Michelangelo, who was a Renaissance artist, involved in Renaissance occultism, right? This was a man who painted supposedly pious paintings that were rife with pagan symbolism during this period of a resurgence of paganism in Europe called the Renaissance. And again, you didn't have the Renaissance in the East, right? But the Western Church, which had broken off from Orthodoxy around 1000 AD, it was the 1047 AD. This was a long process, but it finally was kind of concretized to a certain extent. The West ended up bringing about this resurgence of paganism in the Renaissance. The Renaissance was sold to us now, like liberal professors, just like they tell us, Weishaupt and his group, they were just there for the betterment of man, and they wanted to make good men better, and they're trying to perfect man, and they believe in science, they believe in reason. You get the same nonsense told to you about the Renaissance. There is a book called The Occult Renaissance. It's an academic work that is highly recommended to understand guys like Buonarotti, Phillipe Buonarotti's descendant, Michelangelo. So Buonarotti, the first apostle of a new religion of Baboufism. Yeah, he was born in, born in he wasn't born in 1828. He wrote his History of the Babouf Conspiracy in 1828. Right, remember Louis Blanc, another revolutionary, claimed that Babouf, who had taken the name Gracchus, right, just like Weishaupt had taken the name Spartacus. There was a guy called Cato in his Illuminist inner circle, Spartacus. They all took these inverted Christian names, right? They had this ritualistic change out of their former savage and what do you call it? Backwards, unenlightened Christian life into their life of illumined Illuminists. Babouf had taken the name Gracchus. Louis Blanc claimed that he was an Illuminist. Louis Blanc said that he was. There it is. Louis Blanc, page 65. Louis Blanc said that Babouf was an Illuminist, and Babouf's conspiracy of equals was completely based off of the ideals of Illuminism. And so Louis Blanc said that Babouf was an Illuminist, a disciple of Weishaupt, and it was thus in accordance with the custom of the sect that he had adopted a classical pseudonym, renouncing his Christian names. Just as Weishaupt assumed the name Spartacus, he assumed the name Gracchus. Now, the Illuminatus Jean-Baptiste Cloutz, elected to be known as Anacharsis, right? Anacharsis Cloutz. Pierre Gaspard Chameau was Anaxagoras. The plan of campaign devised by Babouf was therefore modeled directly on the system of Weishaupt, and on his release from prison, which was brought about by the amnesty of the Très Vendémiaire, He gathered his fellow co-conspirators around him and formed an association on Masonic lines by which propaganda was to be carried on in public places, the Confederates recognizing each other by secret signs and passwords. But there's reference to this in Dostoevsky's Demons as well. There's a character who leaves the secret society of Pyotr Stepanovich in the novel. Somebody comes to him to tell him, hey, we're coming to call on you to do some work for us. We need you to give us this printing press, which is another way that the fire in the minds of men spreads in the revolutionaries. And the printing press is very symbolic in that book, as well as a general symbol of the revolution, and the Enlightenment. This character comes to him to get him to tell him, you need to show us where this printing press is buried, and then we'll let you go. They end up murdering him, but they say, oh, we're going to let you go after you bring us to the printing press. And he tells him, I see you give me this handshake here. I want nothing to do with this. I spit on your order, and I spit on you, on your ideals. I spit on your order. He says, I spit on your secret handshake in the novel. Consequently, Lenin, of course, said, I spit on Russia. Lenin, who supposedly was going to save Russia from tyranny and from despotism, said, I spit upon Russia. He hated Russia. All right, so Baboof. Okay, so this is, I like this passage here. This is in World Revolution by Nesta Webster. Unfortunately, the confusion of mind prevailing amongst the advocates of equality was so great that the meetings, which before long consisted of 2,000 people, became like a Tower of Babel. No one knew precisely what he wanted, and no decisions could be reached. It was therefore decided to supplement these huge assemblies by small secret committees, the first of which held its sittings at the house of Amar. So this is a conspiracy of equals. We're all equal. They have these meetings, and then nobody can decide. It's just anarchy, which is what the scene that we were just reading from, that's what transpires before Shigalov comes and gives his exposition of Shigalovism, which is basically Baboofism that we're going to learn about now. And it was chaos. They couldn't even, in the book, in the novel, it's hilarious because they vote on if they're even having a meeting. And then they can't even, they had to vote and decide on whether you put your hand up or don't put your hand up to vote on if it's a meeting or not. All right, so Buonarotti, first apostle of the new religion of Baboofism. He was the first full-time revolutionary in the modern sense, having total dedication to the creation by force of a new secular order. He was from a noble Florentine family, direct descendant of Michelangelo. French was the language of philosophy and progress for the aristocratic Enlightenment in Tuscany and elsewhere, and music, of course, was the language of longing. This is why the father of Pyotr Stepanovich, Pyotr being the character that is the nihilist revolutionary, Illuminist, kind of baboofist, the father speaks a lot of French. He likes to throw in French in his dialogue in the book, and it's really funny because he's very pompous, his dad. All right, so he had acquired a sense of self-importance, but he had no way of sustaining because he was kind of a poor aristocrat. His family became destitute. We're reading here from Fire in the Minds of Men. So his family kind of became destitute. There is a quote from his teacher, and his teacher... this is a quote that we pulled from World Revolution, The Plot Against Civilization. His teacher said, everything exists only for the now with him. Everything exists only for the moment with him. Dissipation rapidly follows study. So he was a very self-indulgent, manic, restless, but gifted student, according to his teacher. All right, but he had a very short attention span. He was really living for the thrills, living for the kicks, kind of a strange guy in that way. Self-indulgent and completely manic. Right? He came from this financially struggling aristocratic Florentine family. He was influenced by Rousseau, much like Weishaupt, influenced by Rousseau, who of course said that, the fall of man is basically private property. Right? Rousseau said that, the primitive state of man is the natural state. We need to go back to nature. You need to go back to nature. I mean, a lot of the revolutionaries, you see them conjure up the idea of nature. In fact, nature and reason, right? They had, after the French Revolution, they would establish feasts and festivals for Dame Nature. and festivals of reason and stuff like that. They do this in the churches. And they do strange blasphemous rituals there as well, sadly. So he was influenced by Rousseau, but through the Francophile faculty at his university. So the university that he went to kind of radicalized him, got him into Rousseau. He became a journalist. He was one of the first revolutionary journalists. What a surprise, right? His only real job, he was a down-and-out aristocrat, had no real skills except a journalist. Became a journalist. So he had this journal that was promoting journalistic and religious liberty. During the first days of the French Revolution, he was enthusiastically propagating those new ideas as an editor and bookseller in Leghorn, and then was exiled to Corsica in 1790. He defended the French Revolution and the idea of happiness, general happiness, right? Just like Weishaupt, the idea of the general happiness is what we gotta go for, and we gotta go back to nature, where alone we realize the faculty of acting according to the determination of our will, freedom, right? Freedom. His baptism by fire occurred during the Corsican years when he joined the campaign of revolutionary France against Sardinia in 1792. He was the propagandist legislator for the only successful part of the expedition. So Buonarotti was a propagandist. So he was involved in the creation of these weird island republics. There was a betrayal of the revolution by some of the people who helped start it, which you do see also reflected in the book here by Dostoevsky, of the betrayal of the revolutionaries and then the murder of those betrayers. So Buonarotti, who at first was into sentimentality and then later kind of moved away from this sentimental understanding of nature and switched to this idea of law and obligation. And this is crucial. This is what you see in the thinking of all these revolutionaries. Now, Buonarotti, this is in 1796 that he kind of started switching up his ideas. He started out with these ideas, the idealistic view of nature, right? We got to go back to nature, just like Weishaupt, Rousseau, in the natural state. Well, that quickly gives way to saying, well, we need law and order and obligation under reason. Love is the law. Love under will. It was Crowley's revolutionary credo. I mean, it's all demonic. It's all the same worldview. So a quote from him: the law of nature differs essentially from what is called the state of nature. The first is the result of experience and reflection. The second of first impressions and ignorance. All right, so he joined the Babeuf conspiracy after he was acquitted, after the period of the Red Terror. Not the Red Terror, rather the terror of the French Revolution. Red Terror came like 120 years later. And he got involved in Babeuf's conspiracy. So Babeuf's conspiracy of equals, he wanted to realize what he called the sweet community. They were all arrested in 1797. And then he was permitted by Napoleon. His release, he had like a pardon, and then was allowed by Napoleon to move to Geneva in 1806. Remember, Napoleon is the result of the Revolutionary Republic and the 1793 Constitution, and all this idea about freedom and equality, that all led to God, Emperor, Despot, Pagan Emperor Napoleon. Rome, of course, ends up blessing, right, which is why Pyotr Stepanovich in the scene, when he's talking about Shigalyovism in the book by Dostoevsky, says that, well, the Pope will get on board with our revolution. We'll get the Pope to get on board. I do think he's referring to the how Napoleon became, the vanguard of the revolution led straight to Napoleon, and then the papacy ended up embracing that worldly kingdom. Okay, so he went to Switzerland, which you see Lenin also moved to Switzerland. Lenin also cultivated his revolutionary garden over there in his mind in Switzerland. The characters of Pyotr and Stavrogin in Dostoevsky's Demon book, they spend time in Switzerland as well as Germany. So he goes over there to Switzerland. Buonarroti's activities during this period will probably never be known, says Fire in the Minds of Men by James H. Billington. He conceived of two successive secret organizations to command the international revolutionary movement, the sublime perfect masters, and the monde, which means like world. Excuse me. All right, so the Baboofists. The Baboofists had this connection with the Philadelphians. The Philadelphians and the American revolutionaries, a lot of the Philadelphians and the, Benjamin Franklin and these folks loved this idea of Philadelphia. Buonarroti's role was even greater in the revolutionary conspiracies that proliferated during the Restoration following the final defeat of Bonaparte. So later on in the early 1800s, long after the French Revolution, the initial 1789 revolution, he ends up becoming real relevant. All right, so Buonarotti, the journalist, he refined into modern form the two central myths of the revolutionary tradition. Number one, the belief of an uncompleted revolution and faith in a perfect alternate rooted in nature is the second. So the two central creeds of the revolutionaries, the uncompleted revolution, right? The perpetual revolution. The perpetual revolution, which is how you solve the problem of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, to maintain the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx called it, to maintain the freedom, and what Dostoevsky reveals is actually just 90% of the population being complete slaves, depersoned, right? Depersonalized, broken, beaten into submission and turned into a herd. The way that you achieve that is through perpetual revolution. That's actually what the perpetual revolution is. All right, so these dupes who think that, the fourth industrial revolution, it's just going to free us, bro. The machines are going to free us. We're all going to be Kangs. We used to be Kangs. We're going to be Kangs again. No. The idea is perpetual revolution. The idea is it's pie in the sky. You're not going to get some completed state, some completed, perfect Marxist, perfect communist state where everybody's equal and everybody's just happy. And you barely have to work. You just do what you want. But you want to work, so you do it because it feels good. You get social credits. No. The 9/10 of the population has to be maintained in a submissive state by terror campaigns. This is why the revolution, the equality and fraternity and liberty, there's always a terror campaign to try to bring everybody in a line. And the perpetual revolution is actually a perpetual terror campaign. The perpetual revolution is a perpetual terror campaign. Don't forget that. Do not forget that. All right, let me check on the chat over here. I've been ranting for almost 2 hours now. What's going on, everybody? What's going on? Where them tips at, y'all? Where them tips at? You guys watching on Rockfin? You guys watching on YouTube? Gladius over on Rockfin. He tipped earlier before it even started. Thank you, Gladius. Tipping $5. Cookies on Rockfin. Tipping $5. Hey, you guys want to support the stream? You guys like the stream? We're giving you university level knowledge here. Good luck finding any course like this in any university. You're not going to find this. All right? You like the stream? Support the stream. Share the videos. Like the videos. Drop a tip. We're the tippers. We're not tippers. Y'all used to tip over there on YouTube. What's up with you? All you bigots. All you bigots. We need a perpetual revolution of tipping. We gotta perpetually revolutionize that tip button. You know how you drop those tips? Let me get that link in the chat here. You drop those tips. The link is in the description. You can support via Streamlabs. Here is the link. If you like what you see, drop it. Drop them tips via Streamlabs. Do it. Dropping that link. All right, guys. Thank you guys for watching. We got plenty more to hit on here. Here's the problem. I over-prepare for this. I take freaking ridiculous levels of notes, and I got all these quotes that I want to pull up. I got pages of notes, pages of quotes, and I get like 10% of what I want to hit on here. All right, if you want to support the stream, share the stream, like the stream, do all that stuff. Hit the thumbs up. If you haven't hit the thumbs up, what's your problem? What's your freaking problem? If you haven't hit the thumbs up, what's your deal? What's your freaking deal? Also, you want to support yourself, support your health, and support your hormones, support your immune system. Make sure to hit up choq.com, choq.com, and get yourself some of the highest quality adaptogens and natural supplements to get your body working right while it is still legal, right? Get it while you still can. Get that body, get that mind, get those hormones working right. I really like I take the Tomcat extract every day. Focus camera. That Tomcat 100. Come on. Camera doesn't want to focus. Take that Tomcat extract every day. Help to boost up that immune system and get those hormones functioning properly. I like to take the Choq Daily. If you go over there to choq.com, choq.com, and you use the coupon code BIG50, you're going to get 50% off everything site-wide. Also, I got another one that's even better. This one's even better. If you want to get yourself some of that Choq Daily, which has the purified shilajit, which has got that tribulus extract, got that mucuna extract that actually helps to sensitize dopamine receptors for all you people out there. You got them dopamine receptors fried. You got to sensitize those dopamine receptors. You got to boost your ability and your sensitivity, your ability to produce those hormones that you need. That will be improved by that Choq Daily. Hit them up, choq.com. You can use that coupon code BIG50 for 50% off store-wide, or BIG53Life. Here's the top secret inner circle Illuminate confirm code. The Illuminate confirm inner circle code BIG53Life, and you're gonna get 53% off all subscriptions for life. Right? Get that monthly subscription of the daily, of the shilajit, the purified shilajit extract. Right? All our soil so mineral depleted due to the modern agricultural practices. So many of us are short on those vital minerals, and it's standardized extract in that shilajit extract. I think it's like 50% fulvic acid. So it's fantastic for detoxification, for cellular respiration, for improved mitochondrial function, so that you can actually use your body and your brain as they are meant to function. If you use that code BIG53Life, you're going to get 53% off all subscriptions for life. So you can get the Tomcat extract. You can get that ashwagandha. My wife loves to take that ashwagandha every night. So there you go, guys. And hey, if you don't go over there to choq.com and use that code BIG50, maybe something bad will happen, right? Maybe your internet, your YouTube commenting habits, or the channels that you enjoy watching, maybe just your employer might find out about that, and maybe he might not like that. Maybe he might not like that. Maybe your employer would learn something about you that he doesn't want to learn, that you don't want him or her to learn, or them to learn. Maybe something bad happens if you don't go to choq.com. If you know what I'm saying. All right, so yeah, back to Babeuf's conspiracy. And Buonarotti, who was the expositor of the Babeuf conspiracy, he wrote the history of the Babeuf conspiracy after he was tried with those conspirators. So they had this idea of a organization of the peace. Right? And this actually meant that they would murder priests and aristocrats. No joke. They were going to murder priests and aristocrats, but this is going to be the institution of a new peace. A new peace. He said they need a great purge. There was a great need for a great purge to prevent the counter-revolutionaries from ruining the revolution, according to the Babeufists that Buonarotti was a part of. So they were against the counter-revolution of what they called the rich egoists, who were really enemies of equality. And then those great treasons would arise from those who lacked holy enthusiasm for creating a new type of community. This pamphlet, 1794, that he wrote was denouncing the betrayal of the Corsican Revolution by its hero leader, General Paoli. He denounced him as a type. So the denouncing of people as a type, right? Well, you're a Luddite, right? You're bourgeois, right? You have these bourgeois ideas of like family, right? So the Leninists and the Bolsheviks after the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet Union, it was, well, you're bourgeois if you don't embrace, polyamory. Right? If you have, a single lover, you're bourgeois. You're against the revolution. So the perpetual revolution was one of his ideas, right? And he kind of concretized that. Perpetual revolution, endless revolution, forever revolution. And it's uncompleted, forever revolution. And then the denouncing people as types, he kind of brought that about, this idea of a purge, a great purge, right? This is the terror, right? The terror campaigns. Buonarotti was super into the terror campaigns and actually implemented one in the Italian Riviera. So he was involved in this group that was trying to bring about part of the French Revolution and expand the French Revolution through Italy. And he was involved in terror campaigns there. Let's see here. The Baboofists were active in the intrigues of the Philadelphians. We already mentioned that. Napoleon actually very much liked Buonarotti. Napoleon respected him, but Buonarotti wasn't into Napoleon. He said that Bonaparte delivered the coup de grace to the revolution. He ruined the revolution by bringing back, tyranny. But it's funny because when you look at what Buonarotti wanted to do, and he did this through the Masonic lodges, he was openly a Freemason and kind of used this Illuminist model of infiltrating lodges. And Buonarotti had the final aim of bringing about the original Baboofist revolution and reinstituting that Constitution of 1793. And he used Masonic symbolism. Right? So it was couched in the symbolism of the occult, and used the Illuminist inner circle model of organization for radical social change and that Republican Constitution. So his organization was also moral in scope, right? The organization was religious, and they were Manichaean. So that Manichaeanism that we see that influenced Weishaupt, and that Manichaeanism and the fire worship of Manichaeanism, right? The light versus the darkness, right? This dualist philosophy, this dualist religion of Manichaeanism. You see this in Buonarotti, you see this in Baboof, you see this in Weishaupt. The fire, the light, the illuminists, the illuminated ones, will bring about the new culture, will bring about the revolution, will bring about the changes to man and revolutionize man. Okay, so this meritocracy, this kind of Masonic meritocracy in Buonarotti's organization and in Baboof's organization, which was what Buonarotti based his organization on, was very much out of Masonry. So Masonry, the ideas of Masonry and Illuminism were real important to Buonarotti. So Buonarotti's revolutionary vision was structured in 3 levels, just like the Illuminists. And this organizational plan, this is, again, from Fire in the Minds of Men, the chapter on the occult origins of the organization. This is from a legitimate academic. This is not, some weird conspiracy nonsense. This is just history. This is from James H. Billington. He was the Librarian of Congress. He likes the revolutionaries. He thinks they're cool, by the way. So he says the organizational plan that Buonarotti distilled from 2 decades of revolutionary experience in Geneva, Switzerland, the hotbed for all these revolutionaries. Hey, what else is in Switzerland now? You got the World Economic Forum, right? This externalization of this, the hierarchy here, the externalization of the hierarchy in the WEF. And Klaus Schwab talking about we have penetrated all of the major cabinets of the governments. Now that, this revolutionary model, it's now just taken for granted. Right, like this just is out in the open. We're going to penetrate the staffs of the presidents, and we're going to bring the revolution about that way. All right. So this Illuminist model, he organized this into 3 different levels. Right, he defined it. Let's see, the revolutionary version of the structure defined his church as the local cell headed by a sage who was alone linked with the regional synod. So, the groups of 5, as Dostoevsky exposes in his book, Demons, this is directly pointing to this. So the Illuminist model is the basis, and the Illuminist obsession with Manichaeanism, with fire worship, is the basis of all of these kind of Rousseauian back to nature, man freed from the tyranny of clericalism and of monarchy and of all, the family and of the patriarchy and all this. You see the same thought threads through all of it. Okay, so Babeuf, infiltrating Masonry, infiltrating and co-opting Masonic organizations. This was the model of the Illuminists, who also recruited Phillipe d'Orléans. So Phillipe d'Orléans, the Orleanists, right, the Phillipe d'Orléans, this was the guy who was kind of the central figure in the bringing about of the French Revolution. And this idea that the Illuminists had played a major part in the French Revolution is not some kooky theory. I mean, this is that you can establish the links of these people. You know exactly who was involved in Illuminism, and mainline historians like our friend James H. Billington here really kind of exposits this in his book, Fire in the Minds of Men. So the obsession with the Pythagorean forms, you also see this in Buonarroti's group. The use of terror campaigns, the use of the Masonic lodges, the use of Geneva, this is majorly present here in Buonarroti's group. Also, the idea of useful larceny. That's a concept that Weishaupt came up with. Useful larceny, using criminals. You see this in the character of Fedka in the book Demons. So, fire. Now, we started off with the quote about fire. Fire in the Minds of Men is the famous book by James H. Billington. That is a quote from a translation of Dostoevsky's book Demons. What is fire? Fire in the minds of men. All right, you guys. Chill out with the we got the edgelords up in the chat. We're on YouTube. Remember, you're on YouTube. Don't be a retard. Don't be retards in the chat. What happened to all my? I used to have mods that would keep my chat so I'm not gonna get kicked off of YouTube. Go over there to Rockfin if you wanna hit on certain topics in the chat. Shout out to everybody on Rockfin. Look at that. We got Justin Saint dropping a $2 tip. We got Not Your Grandma says, I love your work, tipping $10 over there. Thank you so much. Thanks for covering this book. Are you going to go over Fire in the Minds of Men as a companion to Demons? Thank you. End Times Watcher. Fire in the Minds of Men is huge. It is it is so dense. Every single chapter in that book is insanely dense. And yes, we are using it as a companion piece to learn about Dostoevsky's worldview and to kind of expand on what Dostoevsky is showing us in the novel The Demons. But Fire in the Minds of Men is not a book that you can just cover in a few hours of lecture, right? Like same with this is too. I was a little bit too ambitious with thinking I would be able to, talk about all these characters. Like we haven't even gotten deep into Lenin's past yet either. And we did talk about how the mooching revolutionaries that are shown by Dostoevsky in his book. The revolutionary as a perpetually mooching, never had a job, never working journalist type. Right? The perpetual moocher who aristocratic in nature, aristocratic by birth, but don't like to work, who hate their parents and see their parents just as a source of money. That's Lenin. That is Lenin. All right, the terror campaign, the immediate terror campaign and the complete despotism, that is Lenin as well. So thank you very much. And Fire in the Minds of Men is a fantastic book. It's amazing. It's an incredible book. It's a book that everybody here, I think, should get a copy of and read. But also Demons, Dostoevsky's Demons, which we're talking about today. This is a great companion piece after you've read Fire in the Minds of Men and after you've studied a little bit about the revolutionaries, the groups like the Baboufists, guys like Buonarotti, we're talking about now. Okay. So, all right, we talked with Shigalyovism, the symbol of Shigalyovism in the book there. Are you seeing that? These ideas that Dostoevsky's describing, the ideas that the characters are embodying in the book Demons, this is historical. Right? This is historical, autobiographical fiction, right? But it tells us so much about reality. And in fact, it actually is quite prophetic in nature, especially the conversations that we just heard. We were quoting about Shigalyovism, right? So he's talking about we're going to get rid of 100 million people. We got to lop off 100 million heads to get to have the revolution be kickstarted. We got to kickstart the revolution with a terror campaign and the liberty and equality, the sacred liberty, equality, fraternity. Well, you're going to have fraternity, but 10% of the population are going to have real liberty. 90% of the population are going to have equality, and they'll have fraternity with each other, and that 90%, that's just a herd. That's just a dehumanized herd. I mean, it's a horrific vision, but this is exactly what the Soviets implemented. This is exactly what the Bolshevik Revolution brought about. And this is exactly what the WEF is openly advocating for now. Right? The 90% population reduction, also mentioned here in Dostoevsky's book. This is 1870. 1871, I think, that he's writing this. Okay, so then the chapter Ivan the Tsarevich. This is an important quote from Dostoevsky's book here, where the young revolutionary nihilist Pyotr, the son of this liberal goober, the son of basically the son of a Jordan Peterson type character. No joke, and I don't hate on Jordan Peterson. I'm just saying, like, this is what Dostoevsky's showing, is that gentlemen with the worldview like Jordan Peterson, who does seem to be moving towards Christianity. Glory to God. Hopefully Jordan Peterson leaves his Jungian subjectivist, essentially nihilistic worldview and ends up embracing Christ. He sees the limitations of nihilism. He critiques nihilism, but he's critiquing nihilism from the viewpoint of exactly what gives birth to nihilism, and that's classical liberalism. So Pyotr here, the son of the liberal professor, the nihilist, revolutionary, Illuminist, Peter Stepanovich, is here trying to coax another character, Stavrogan, into his revolutionary group. It seems like Stavrogan was involved in this group at one point, but is kind of distancing himself from it. He's kind of either uninterested or depressed. He's going through some stuff. Whatever is happening with Stavrogan is not exactly clear until a little bit later in the book, in the chapter at Tikhon's, where he confesses to this bishop a lot. It ends up kind of opening up the character quite a bit. Pyotr is trying to coax him into it. Remember, the Illuminists were all about infiltrating secret societies, infiltrating high society, trying to get as close to the levers of power as possible in order to bring out the revolution of the mind that Weishaupt waxed poetic about, in order to bring about reason and logic. And of course, their order was all based on occultism, right? It's all based on ritual and even sacrifice, the use of blood spoken about in some of their initiation rituals. So it's reason, right? It's all about reason and science. Here's Pyotr Stepanovich talking about Shigalyovism, which we discussed earlier. He says he's got it all down nicely in his notebook. He's got spying. He's got each member of society watching the others and obliged to inform. Each belongs to all and all to each. They're all slaves and equal in their slavery, slander and murder in extreme cases, but above all, equality. First, the level of education, science, and talents is lowered. A high level of science and talents is accessible only to higher abilities. No need for higher abilities. Higher abilities have always seized power and become despots. Higher abilities cannot fail to be despots and have always corrupted rather than been of use. They are to be banished or executed. Cicero's tongue is cut off. Copernicus's eyes are put out. Shakespeare is stoned. This is Shigalyovism. Slaves must be equal. There has never yet been either freedom or equality without despotism. But within a herd, there must be equality. And this is Shigalyovism. Ha, ha, ha. So you find it strange. I'm for Shigalyovism. Stavrogan tried to quicken his pace and get home more quickly. If this man is drunk, where did he manage to get drunk? Kept occurring to him. Can it be the cognac? This guy had like one drink, right? This guy had like one drink, and he's completely drunken after this meeting that he just had. Or in the end of this meeting that he just had, where Shigoyov gets up and talks about his plans, he makes everybody basically vow to go the fast way of rapid purge, right? Violent, drastic, demonic fervor for revolution. He basically gets everybody to agree to this, and then compromises everybody and says, hey, if we were to be involved in a political murder, would you snitch on us? And then most people, everybody says, no, I would never. Two guys get up and leave. The guy he's trying to talk to is one of the guys that got up and left. He is the son of a very influential woman. He's an aristocrat with land holdings, and Pyotr really wants him involved and to continue being involved with him, right? So he's wondering, like, why is this guy acting so crazy? He's like demonically drunk, basically. He only had one drink, and he's just acting insane. So listen, Stavrogan. To level the mountains is a good idea, not a ridiculous one. I'm for Shigoyov. No need for education. Enough of science. There's sufficient material, even without science, for 1,000 years to come, but obedience must be set up. Only one thing is lacking in the world: obedience. The thirst for education is already an aristocratic thirst. As soon as there's just a tiny bit of family or love, there's a desire for property. So again, that's the Weishaupt and Rousseau idea of property is bad, family is bad. We'll extinguish desire. We'll get drinking, gossip, denunciation going. We'll get unheard of depravity going. We'll stifle every genius in infancy, everything reduced to a common denominator, complete equality. We've learned to trade, and we're honest people. We don't need anything else. What was the recent response to the English workers? Only the necessary is necessary. Henceforth, that is the motto of the whole globe. Right? So it's like, it is what it is. Only what's necessary is necessary. But there is also a need for convulsion. This will be taken care of by us, the rulers. Slaves must have rulers. Complete obedience, complete impersonality. But once every 30 years, Shigoyov gets a convulsion going, and they all suddenly start devouring each other up to a certain point, simply so as not to be bored. Boredom is an aristocratic sensation. In Shigoyovism, there will be no desires. Desire and suffering are for us, and for the slaves, Shigoyovism. And you exclude yourself, again, escape from Stavrogan. And you know, I thought of handing the whole world over to the Pope. Let him come out on foot, unshod, and show himself to the mob as if to say, look what I've been driven to. And everyone will swarm around him, even the army. The Pope on top, us around him, and under us, Shigoyovism. That's only necessary that the Internationale agree to the Pope, but it will. And the old codger will instantly agree. Besides, he has no other choice. So remember my words, ha ha ha. Stupid? Tell me, is it stupid or not? we get the Pope. The Pope's going to be down. But you catch that. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, he lays out the Illuminist, the Baboofist, and what ended up being the Leninist model. Right? You need despotism. You don't get, for people to be free and equal, you need to have despotism. You need terror. Right? We need to unleash terror. Remember, Lenin let out the prisoners. He opened up the prisons, let the people out of the prisons, and they rampaged. They rampaged and destroyed everything, destroyed the entire order. Matt donated $10, has been loving this series, bro. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that, man. Ragdillion donated $5, says, what do you think about Bobby moving towards Islam? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think about that. Yeah, hey, thank you guys. Really appreciate the questions and the comments there. I mean, that has nothing to do with the topic we're talking about now. We're talking about Shigoyovism. We're talking about Baboofism. We're talking about Dostoevsky's demons, Leninism, and how prophetic this novel is. How it exposes the exact methodology of the actual real Weishaupt Illuminist group, and how he was influenced, how this book was so influenced by the revolutions and the revolutionaries there it is, that Dostoevsky was exposed to and is exposing in this book. All right, so he says, listen, we'll get trouble going. Merkovensky was hurrying terribly. He kept seizing Stavrogan by the left sleeve every moment. I've already told you, we'll penetrate among the people themselves. Do you know that we're already terribly strong now? Ours aren't only the ones who knife and burn or perform classic pistol shots or bite people. That kind only gets in the way. I can conceive of nothing without discipline. I'm a crook, really, not a socialist. Ha ha, listen, I've counted them all up. The teacher who laughs with children at their God and at their cradle is already ours. The lawyer who defends an educated murderer, saying that he's more developed than his victims and couldn't help killing to get money, is already ours. Schoolboys who kill a peasant just to see how it feels are ours. Jurors who acquit criminals left and right are ours. The prosecutor who trembles in court for fear of being insufficiently liberal is ours. Ours. Administrators, writers, a lot of them, an awful lot of them are ours, and they don't know it themselves. On the other hand, the docility of schoolboys and little fools has reached the highest point. All mentors have burst gallbladders. Everywhere there's vanity and immeasurable measure. Appetites beastly, unheard of. Do you know how much we can achieve with little ready-made ideas alone? So, this is the idea of getting anarchy going and causing chaos. Right? Arson, larceny. And this is what you see here in the book. And that arson and that larceny is exactly what Leninism became. Right? This is exactly what the Babufists wanted to bring about. They wanted to bring about a great purge, wanted to bring about a great upheaval. Right? A terrible upheaval, a terrible uprising, and a massive depopulating purge and a terror campaign. Right? This is to bring about a worldly kingdom. Right? And notice that this common thread of the revolutionaries, and who do they hate the most? What do they hate the most? They hate monarchy, they hate Christianity, they hate Christ. So the root of all of this, this idea of creating a worldly kingdom is, in Weishaupt, was a complete denial of Christ. And then he decided, well, I can't just deny Christ outwardly because we want to bring in these Protestants. We want to bring in these Protestant pastors and theologians and Reformed theologians. Weishaupt then embraced the language of Christianity and embraced heresies. Yeah. So these heretical groups who are, Manichaeans, which, Manichaeanism, isn't it interesting how Manichaeanism is just so akin to Islam. All right. So the guy who was talking about the, apostatizing in Islam. What is it that these revolutionaries love the most? Destruction of family, destruction of nation. In order to bring about worldly despotism, and it's very often based on twisting of Scripture, twisting of Christ, and a denial of the church, right? A denial of the body of Christ, which is what we're looking at here is revolutionary Russia. So when I talk about the body of Christ, I don't mean Lutheranism. I don't mean Roman Catholicism. I don't mean any Protestant sect. I'm talking about the Orthodox Church. Now, we believe that is the church that Christ established. No, I mean, it's documented. It's fact. That's the church that Christ established. So the denial of the church, the denial of tradition, and the embracing of heresy is the root of all these revolutionaries. The socialists, they want to bring about this chiliastic worldly kingdom. All right? Like Chiliasm was condemned at the ecumenical councils. Chiliasm is a heresy. Right? The bringing about that Christ is going to establish a worldly kingdom. You're going to have a 1,000-year kingdom on earth, 1,000-year earthly kingdom. That is condemned. This is heretical. And the root of all of this, the root of Weishaupt was hatred of Christ, of hatred of God, and a man becoming God. Man becoming God by his own will. Isn't that interesting? So, the spreading of chaos, the spreading of sin. Right? He's just talking about all these liberals. They're ours. They're ours. The people who think they're insufficiently liberal and are ashamed of not being liberal, they're ours. Right? The prosecutors who let the jurors who acquit guilty criminals, those are ours. They're already ours. We've got these people. These people who don't go to church. He says that the people are drunk. Mothers are drunk. Children are drunk. The churches are empty. And in the courts, it's 200 strokes, fetch us a pot. Oh, just let this generation grow up. Only it's a pity there's no time to wait. Otherwise, they could get themselves even drunker. Ah, what a pity there are no proletarians. But there will be. We're getting there. So Piotr, he's talking about Marxist theory there because there wasn't a proletarian class. You didn't have the proletariat you didn't have full development of capitalism yet in Russia, which would, like Marxist theory says you have to have development of capitalism first to bring about socialism. But Marx, it seemed like there were times when he actually said, well, maybe Russia can bring about through some peasant uprising, and the peasants can act as the proletarians. This is what he's talking about. We're going to get chaos going. We're going to get madness going. We'll proclaim destruction. Why? Again, this little idea is so captivating. But we've got to limber up. We'll get fires going. We'll get legends going. Here, every mangy crew will be of use. I'll find such zealots for you in these same crews as would be ready for any kind of shooting and would be grateful for the honor. Well, sir, so the trouble will start. Such a heaving we'll see as the world has never seen. Russia will be darkened with mist. The earth will weep for the old gods. Well, sir, and then, this is the real energy, the real spirit of the revolution, and this is what you see in Baboufism. This is what you see in the revolution of the French Revolution. This is what you saw in the Bolsheviks. This is what you see in Leninism. And Buonarotti, the descendant of Michelangelo, helping to spread Baboufism, looking for equality. That's the actual result of it. It's complete despotism. It's manipulation of people using their basest urges, the embracing of complete bedlam, right? Just complete anarchy in order to bring about a new order. Yeah, most liberal scholars today, they'll say, Weishaupt and his group, they meant well, and it's all overblown. They weren't really a problem. But then when you actually read what Weishaupt wrote, the guy was a complete degenerate. The guy hated people. The guy saw himself as above everybody, and his real political theory was complete destruction of everything. And the end state, he just gives these empty platitudes about, it's gonna be equal stuff. you're gonna all be kings or whatever. He promises these people literally promised people that they would have superpowers if they joined his order. If you reach the higher levels, the illuminated degrees, you are going to have telepathic powers, he told them. And they were disappointed because when they get there, they realize they don't have telepathic powers, and they're all just completely compromised. And they're being used and profiled for nefarious purposes by people who are liars and scoundrels. And that's what Weishaupt really was. He was a scoundrel. This whole thing was he wanted power. That's really what it was. It's not about freedom. It's about despotism. It is about power, and it is about bringing about a new order where these people become gods. All right. I think we're gonna close it up. We're gonna close it up here with one more quote. Where did that go? Yeah, let me find this. All right, one more quote from Pyotr Stepanovich, and you're going to see how this really rounds out the character of Pyotr as well as Weishaupt, right? Weishaupt, Babouf, all these people. So after he gets these people after he gets his group, his little secret society here to essentially murder somebody. They murder a man. Right? There's several murders that happen. There's an arson. All these people are wrapped up in this, and he comes and tells them. Where'd that go? And so he comes and tells them, you guys all must be so proud of yourselves. You must feel so good about what you've done. Where'd that go? Okay, so, all right, so this is before the murder. Forgive me. This is before the murder. And he's talking to Stavrogan again. And this is after the fire, after the failed fete, where it just turned into chaos, right? And then this kind of revolutionary fire, the fire in the minds of men. The fire's in people's minds, said the governor as he's going insane. This is after that. And he's, again, talking to Stavrogan, trying to get him back involved in his little plot here. He's just spewing. He says, you see what it means to slacken even a little? No, this democratic scum with its five sums is a poor support. What we need is one splendid, monumental, despotic will, supported by something external and not accidental. Then the five sums will also put their tails of obedience between their legs, and their obsequiousness will occasionally come in handy. Anyhow, though it's being shouted on all trumpets that Stavrogan needed to burn his wife, and that's why the town got burned down still. So then he starts trying to manipulate the guy and be like, oh yeah, everyone knows you like killed your wife. And the guy's like, well, I didn't kill my wife. What are you talking about? But that's so revealing right there. He's the democratic scum with its five sums is poor support. So this is what he really thinks about these people. He's telling them, oh, we're all going to be equal. We're going to be the new elite. We're going to have this great world, and we're the enlightened ones, and it's just going to be this fantastic world. No, he sees them as scum. He says, what we need is one splendid, monumental, despotic will supported by something external and not accidental. We need obedience, right? We need complete obedience. And that's what the revolution always brings about. Liberty, fraternity, equality. Just like Shugayov said in that chapter earlier, I began with unlimited freedom. I conclude with unlimited despotism. That's what happens. The Bolsheviks sold people on, you're gonna get land. You're gonna get land. We're all gonna own everything. We're gonna hold everything in common. We're gonna redistribute the wealth. You're gonna get land and bread. What did that result in? Despotism, Leninism, Stalinism, starvation, the whole of the more. It ended in complete destruction and chaos and despotism. And they didn't get land. They had it confiscated. And so the symbol of fire, what is the revolutionary fire? What is the fire of the Illuminists? Well, they believe it's their will. It's human will. They believe that their will, they will use that fire to burn down the old order, and then they'll somehow get control of this raging fire, and after everything has turned to ashes and dust, that they'll just remake it, and it'll be great for them. And there'll be 90% that'll serve them, of course, and the Shigoyevism, as Dostoevsky showed in his book here, Demons. But where did that fire come from? And it's interesting. The most powerful symbol in this book, the fire. The fire is in people's minds, they say. But that fire, where did the fire used to be? That fire used to be in the lamps in front of the icons, in the prayer corners. Those icons that became to the liberals in this book, right, who left their tradition, who left Christ, who wanted to embrace themselves as Christ, who wanted to embrace false Christs, who wanted to embrace a false God, who wanted to become their own God. That fire left the lamps in the icon corners. That fire left the lamps that were burning for prayer to God. It was put into the hands of those revolutionaries who set the whole culture ablaze and brought about death and destruction and ultimately despotism. Right, and that's why you see the propaganda images of Lenin. You got the worker holding that Promethean fire. The Promethean fire is a symbol that in the Pythagorean cults, in Masonry, in the Illuminist cult, fire is their symbol. These are like fire worshippers. The Manichaeans. Also, they're fire worshippers, right? So anyways, it's up to us what we do with our lives. It's up to us. We do have free will. Major theme in Dostoevsky's book here is the free will of the people. And if you want to go back and you listen to the first episode, if you already haven't, we talk about the redemption arc for the characters in that book, right? Even though the father of the revolutionary ends up repenting and ends up repenting of like all his vanity and his nonsense and all his liberal ideas and ideals, and he ends up. So there is a possibility to stop this, but it doesn't come from embracing liberalism. It doesn't come from embracing these other strange heretical movements. Just like Father Seraphim Rose said, the only exit, Christ is the only exit from this world. And he said, Father Seraphim Rose said, Christ is the only exit from this world. Political utopia, sexual rapture, financial independence, all of these are but blind alleys in which rot the corpses of the many that have tried them. I'll leave it at that. Take his mind.